Hello, my name is Dr. Diwan S. Raja. Today I will discuss about the ventricles of the brain and the cerebrospinal fluid. The ventricles of the brains are cavities inside the brain and it contains cerebrospinal fluid. So, the ventricles of the brain are cavities in the brain. Okay, they contain cerebrospinal fluid or CSF in abbreviation and choroid plexus. Okay, so we got the ventricles. The ventricles of the brain are cavities in the brain. They are communicating cavities. These are communicating cavities. They are lined by ependymal cells. We have four ventricles. We have two lateral ventricles, two lateral ventricles, okay, one each in each cerebral hemisphere, one in each cerebral hemisphere, okay, one third ventricle, that is present in the diencephalon, and we have one fourth ventricle that is present in the brainstem, okay, anterior to the cerebellum, in the brainstem and the cerebellum, okay, in between the, you can say, in between the brainstem and the cerebellum. So we got the ventricles. They are communicating cavities lined by ependymal cells. We have total 4 ventricles, 2 lateral ventricle, each lateral ventricle, one in each cerebral hemisphere. One cerebral hemisphere contains one lateral ventricle. We have only one third ventricle that is present in the diencephalon. We know that diencephalon is formed by the thalamus and hypothalamus. One fourth ventricle between the brainstem and the cerebellum. Okay, so if you go there, this is one of the cerebral hemisphere. It contains one lateral ventricle. We should have another cerebral hemisphere that contain the lateral ventricle, one lateral ventricle. So we have two lateral ventricle, and then we have the third ventricle between the thalamus and hypothalamus on one side, another side thalamus, hypothalamus. So it is just like a slit, thalamus, hypothalamus, thalamus, hypothalamus. This slit is the third ventricle. Then the fourth ventricle is in between the brain stem. This is the brain stem. The brain stem is the midbrain pons medulla oblongata. The fourth ventricle is bounded anteriorly by the pons and the upper part of the medulla oblongata. This is the fourth ventricle. This is the cerebellum. So in between the pons and medulla oblongata anteriorly, posteriorly the cerebellum, we have the fourth ventricle. Third ventricle is a junction between two cerebral hemisphere. Its lateral wall is formed by the thalamus and hypothalamus. And inside the septum pellucidum, inside each cerebral hemisphere, we have one lateral ventricle. This is lateral ventricle. Okay, we got the ventricles. Now we'll go to find out the lateral ventricle. What are the parts of lateral ventricle? Okay, lateral ventricle. Lateral ventricle has frontal horn or anterior horn, frontal horn that is present in the frontal lobe of the brain. Okay, this is the frontal lobe of the brain. Then we have the lateral horn. Okay, that is present partly in the frontal lobe and partly in the parietal lobe of the brain. Then we have the occipital or posterior horn that is present in the occipital lobe of the brain. This is the occipital lobe of the brain. It contains the occipital horn. We have the inferior horn. This is inferior or temporal horn. Inferior or temporal horn. Temporal horn that is present inside the temporal lobe of the brain. We got the four horns. Then we'll go to the atrium. Atrium is junction between the occipital horn, the body of the lateral horn, and the inferior temporal horn. This is the atrium. Atrium, it contains the choroid plexus. The body contains choroid plexus. The third ventricle will go there. The inferior horn contains choroid plexus. Occipital horn has no choroid plexus. Frontal horn has no choroid plexus. The choroid plexus in the atrium is also called glomus. Contains glomus, and that glomus is a choroid plexus. It may be calcified in the adult. That can be visualized by X-ray or CT scan or in MRI. Okay, so we have to find out what is inside the cavity of the lateral ventricle. It contains the cerebrospinal fluid plus the choroid plexus. Where it is absent, choroid plexus is absent in the frontal lobe. It is absent in the frontal horn. It is absent in the occipital horn. Okay, it is present in the body of the lateral ventricle as well as in the atrium of lateral ventricle and inferior horn of lateral ventricle. Okay, we got the lateral ventricle. Okay, then this is the third ventricle. Third ventricle is a slit-like cavity in between the diencephalon. Diencephalon is formed by thalamus and hypothalamus. Okay, so this is thalamus, this is hypothalamus. So this is thalamus that forms the lateral wall of the third ventricle. This is hypothalamus. Okay, thalamus, and they form the lateral wall of the third ventricle on each side. Okay, and the third ventricle, roof of the third ventricle contains choroid plexus. This green is the choroid plexus. Then how the lateral ventricle is connected to the third ventricle? You have to know that part. Okay, lateral ventricles are connected to the third ventricle by the foramina of Monro, also called interventricular foramina. Okay, we have two lateral ventricle, we have two interventricular foramina from both sides. Those are connected to the third ventricle. We have one third ventricle, two lateral ventricle. Each lateral ventricle is connected to the third ventricle by a interventricular foramen. So two interventricular foramen forms the interventricular foramina of Monro, or interventricular foramina. Okay, we got the third ventricle. Third ventricle lateral wall is formed by the thalamus and hypothalamus. Thalamus and hypothalamus forms the diencephalon. Okay, lateral ventricle is present in the telencephalon or in the cerebral hemisphere. The third ventricle that is present in the, this is third ventricle that is present, third ventricle is present in the into diencephalon. Okay, we got that. Now from third ventricle to fourth ventricle, this is the fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle, you can say fourth. Okay, fourth ventricle. So third ventricle is connected to fourth ventricle. Connection between the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. How? By the cerebral aqueduct. Also called aqueduct of Sylvius. Aqueduct of Sylvius. Okay, we got that. Where is my aqueduct of CBS? This is the lower part of third ventricle. From third ventricle to fourth ventricle, the channel is the, okay, you can make that. That channel is the cerebral aqueduct. This is that. Okay, cerebral aqueduct, aqueduct of Sylvius. Then we are going to the fourth ventricle. Okay, the aqueduct of Sylvius does not contain any choroid plexus. Choroid plexus is present at the roof of the third ventricle. But aqueduct of Sylvius does not contain any choroid plexus. Okay, this is a narrow channel, and in some individual it may be stenosed congenitally that lead to hypothalamus. Okay, now we'll go to the fourth ventricle. Okay. Fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle is located between the pons and medulla oblongata anteriorly, cerebellum posteriorly. Location between the pons and medulla oblongata anteriorly, and the cerebellum posteriorly. Okay, we got this diamond shaped or tent shaped fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle, in the lower part of the roof we have the choroid plexus. Fourth ventricle has multiple openings. Okay. Fourth ventricle has two lateral opening. These are called foramina of Luschka. Foramina of Luschka. Okay. And one median opening that is called foramen of Magendai. Okay. The fourth ventricle is also communicating to the central canal of the spinal cord. This is going to, because this is a part of the neural tube embryologically. Okay, so the fourth ventricle is also continuous with that of the central canal of spinal cord. So two lateral opening, foramen of Luschka, and one median opening, foramen of Magendai. Through this opening, fourth ventricle is communicating to the subarachnoid space that contains CSF. So we have to flow the CSF. Let's start the flow chart of CSF. Okay, so if we go there, we had lateral ventricle here, lateral ventricle, okay, lateral, make it a little bigger, lateral ventricle, okay, ventricle, we got that, lateral ventricle, then interventricular foramina of Monro, interventricular foramina of Monro, interventricular foramen. This is also interventricular foramen. Okay, then we'll go to the third ventricle. This is the third ventricle. Third ventricle. This is present in the cerebral hemisphere. This is present in the cerebral hemisphere. This is present in the thalamus, in the diencephalon, between the thalamus, hypothalamus, thalamus, hypothalamus, thalamus, hypothalamus. Then we have the cerebral aqueduct that will go to the, this is the cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. It will go to the fourth ventricle. Okay. We'll go to the fourth ventricle. Okay, this is the fourth ventricle. Okay, from fourth ventricle we have the foramen of Magendie and two lateral foramen of Luschka. Foramen of Magendie, and I'm showing one side, foramen of Luschka. With two sides, we should have two. On other side, okay, you can try that. Foramina of Luschka. Okay. Then this foramen of Luschka and foramen of Magendie, the CSF will go to the subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space. Okay. Then we go by means of the choroid plexus. It will go by arachnoid villi, not choroid plexus. Arachnoid villi. Arachnoid villi or granulation to the, will go to the superior sagittal sinus. Superior sagittal sinus. Superior sagittal sinus. Okay. So if you look at the flow chart again, lateral ventricle to interventricular foramen of Monro, interventricular foramen of Monro. Then third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, that is present. Cerebral aqueduct is present in the midbrain or mesencephalon. It is present in the midbrain. Okay. Then through the cerebral aqueduct will go to the fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle has multiple opening. Okay. This continue to the spinal cord. It has the opening here, foramen of Magendie. We have two lateral opening, foramen of Luschka. It will go to the subarachnoid space. From subarachnoid space, by means of arachnoid villi, villi are collected together. We also call them that collected villi, arachnoid granulation, that will go inside the superior sagittal sinus. So if you look at this picture, okay, this is the skull bone, this is the dura mater, okay, and this is the superior sagittal sinus, superior sagittal sinus that contains venous blood. This is the arachnoid villi, arachnoid villi. Okay, they are collected together. We call it arachnoid granulation. Okay, then this is still dura mater. This is the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid mater. Noid mater. Okay, arachnoid mater. Then we'll get the pia mater and the brain. This is pia mater and this is the brain. Okay, what happened? CSF by means of foramen of Magendie, foramen of Luschka. It will go to the subarachnoid space. Our brain has three layers: the dura mater, arachnoid mater, okay, and the pia mater. We have the subarachnoid space, and we have the subarachnoid space contains the subarachnoid space contains the CSF, that is subarachnoid space between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater, that contains CSF, and that CSF will go by means of the arachnoid villi to the venous blood of superior sagittal sinus. This is blood. It contains the blood. It is the venous blood. Okay. This is venous blood. Okay. Of the superior sagittal sinus. How it goes? It goes from the subarachnoid space. It may go through between the arachnoid cell or as a vesicle from the arachnoid cell to the dural venous sinus. So it may go two ways. It may go through in between the cells of the arachnoid mater, or it may go through the cell by means of the vesicle. Okay, so we got that. If we just compare this, then this will contain lateral ventricle, and this is the interventricular foramina of Monro. This is the third ventricle, thalamus, hypothalamus. This is the cerebral aqueduct that is present in the midbrain. This is the fourth ventricle that is bounded anteriorly by pons and upper part of medulla oblongata, posteriorly by the cerebellum. Okay, and the roof of the lower part of the roof of the fourth ventricle has three openings. One is the foramen of Magendie, midline opening, and two foramen of Luschka. Fourth ventricle is also continuous with that of the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, so from the foramen of Magendie, foramen of Luschka, it is going to the subarachnoid space that contains CSF. Okay, subarachnoid space also surround the spinal cord up to the level of the sacral vertebra too. Okay, so not only around the brain, we have subarachnoid space around the spinal cord also. It go even further down the spinal cord to the sacral vertebra 2 level. Okay, so we got the arachnoid mater here. This arachnoid mater, subarachnoid space is here. Okay, between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, and CSF will go through these arachnoid cells. Okay, we got the flow of CSF. Now we go to the choroid plexus, structure of choroid plexus. Okay, this is an electron microscopic structure of choroid plexus. So what is choroid plexus? Choroid plexus. Okay, plexus. Okay, this is a pial fold inside they are pial folds inside the ventricles. Okay. What is their structure? They contain capillary. This is capillary lined by fenestrated endothelium. Okay, lined by fenestrated endothelium. Okay, they are lined by, look at the gap between the endothelial cell. It contains blood. These are RBCs, may also contain WBC platelets. Okay, then this is the basal lamina here, basal lamina. We have also basal lamina here, 1, another one here, basal lamina. This is the capillary. This is what? This is the capillary. Okay. Then this is also basal lamina, and this is the connective tissue layer. It contains fibrocyte and the collagen and fibrocyte or fibrocyte. Okay. Then this is what? These are the choroid epithelium. These are ependymal cells. So we have the basal lamina of the capillary endothelium, basal lamina of the ependymal cell. This is also basal lamina. Okay. Then we get the connective tissue here. This is connective tissue containing collagen and fibrocyte, and this is covered by the choroid epithelium. This is actually a type of ependymal cell with tight junctions. You must remember that, tight junction. Ependymal cells with tight junction. Here is the tight junction here. You must know that this is the tight junction. Okay. Tight or jonular occludence, tight junction, that forms the blood CSF barrier. So CSF will go to that. CSF will go from the blood. Okay. Then it should go out of the cell. Cannot go between the ependymal cell or epithelial cells. So CSF will go out like this way. Okay. So why CSF is moving from the ventricle to the subarachnoid space to the superoscipital sinus? Idea is that there is a shuttle pressure gradient. So flow of CSF, why there is flow of CSF, or you can say flow of cerebrospinal fluid, that is CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. What is the reason behind this flow from this third ventricle, then cerebral aqueduct, then fourth ventricle, then subarachnoid space, then the dural venous sinus, the superior sagittal sinus? Why this happened? This is due to the shuttle pressure gradient. Okay, so this is arterial side and this is venous side. So there is pressure gradient. Okay, so that is the reason. Plus, okay, shuttle pressure gradient, plus the pulsation of blood vessel, movement of the brain. Okay, slight movement of the brain. Okay, slight movement of the brain. Plus, we add one more thing, that is pulsation of blood vessels. Pulsation of blood vessels in the subarachnoid space. Okay, we got the flow of cerebrospinal fluid and the regions behind the flow of cerebrospinal fluid from the ventricle towards the superoscipital sinus via the subarachnoid space. Okay, we got that. Now we learn something about cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, we'll make it very simple. Cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid. What is that? This is a clear acellular fluid. Clear acellular fluid. In the ventricles of the brain and the subarachnoid space, subarachnoid spaces of the brain and spinal cord and spinal cord. We got the definition of the cerebrospinal fluid. It is just like water. It is acellular. Only a few cells are present there. Okay, it is present in the ventricles of the brain and the subarachnoid space surrounding the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, we got the CSF. We got the how much it is formed. Formation each day around 500 ml per 24 hours. How much is always present in the system? Okay, 140 ml, maybe 120 ml is always present in the system. System means around the brain and the spinal cord, around the spinal cord in the subarachnoid space, also in the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, we got the formation. Okay, function is important. Function it supports the brain, because we have a lot of trabeculae in the arachnoid matter. This trabeculae acts as a cushion, supports the brain. Okay, cushions the brain, cushions the brain. Okay, and provide nutrition and passage for brain and a passage for brain waste. Okay, plus it also transports hormones and the releasing factor, hormone releasing factor and releasing factors. So multiple function. Okay, so this is the function. Support is that our brain, if we just add two cerebral hemisphere, it is around 1400 gram in weight. So by the CSF around it, there would be some buoyancy. That buoyancy will float the brain, so the weight will be reduced from 1400 gram to the, due to CSF, the weight will be decreased from 1400 gram to 45 gram due to the buoyancy of the cerebrospinal fluid around the buoyancy. Okay, buoyancy of the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, buoyancy of cerebrospinal fluid. So 1400 gram will be 45 gram. So in this way, the brain substance cannot crush the substance itself, and the blood vessel or the nerves, the cranial nerves against the bones of the skull, because it is surrounded, it is floated by the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so we got the function, we got the circulation, we have just discussed the circulation. We'll go to the composition of CSF. That is very important. Normal composition, okay, you can say normal composition of the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, what is the normal composition? Normal composition, it is almost like water. Its pH or negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration is 7.35, almost like water. Okay, specific gravity, specific gravity 1.003, again very close to water, maybe 1.007 on average. Okay, glucose, how much glucose it contains? Glucose 66% of plasma glucose. Okay, so if a person has 100 gram% of glucose in his blood plasma, then his glucose in the CSF would be 66 milligram per 100 ml, so 66%. Okay, in a diabetic person, the glucose level is more than usual in CSF also. Protein level is about 45 milligram per 100 ml, milligram per deciliter. Okay, pressure is important to us. Pressure, how much pressure? Pressure is 80 to 180 millimeter of water. 80 to 180 millimeter of water. Okay, so you must not do mistake. It is not mercury, millimeter of water or CSF. Okay, so that is the composition. So that's all about the ventricles of the brain and CSF. If you like my video, please support my channel. Please share the information with your friends and please subscribe me. Have a nice day. Bye now.